We're going to do something uncommon here in Washington. We're going to start about 2 minutes early. We do have votes pending, will be called fairly soon, so we're going to try to make sure that we get people through the cycle as fast as possible, get the testimony, and then move forward. So we want to welcome you. I want to call the hearing to order, and I recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. Today our subcommittee will be looking into the issue of hazardous waste manifests required under Section 3002 of the Solid Waste Disposal Act and whether it makes sense to have these manifests submitted in paper form or converted into an electronic format. I think it undoubtedly makes sense to modernize to electronic filing. With the commonplace usage of laptops, computers, scanners, PDAs, and tablets, the idea of having this information maintained electronically seemed like a no-brainer to me. I hope this hearing helps us understand that good reason has prevented us from using an electronic system, and if it is legal in nature, how Congress can help encourage a transition. When I first learned EPA was still requiring multiple copies of a paper manifest to track every movement of hazardous waste from the generator through the transporter and to the final disposal site, I was surprised a more user-friendly format was not being used. When I then found out EPA also required these same manifests be sent via postal mail back to the original waste generator and the state regulator to be kept on file, I was astounded at the inefficiency of the system and the cost to both government and the private sector. When the agency was last proposing revisions that would standardize RCRA Subtitle C manifesting data requirements, EPA's website claims about 12 million tons of hazardous waste per year was being manifested for shipment, involving 2.4 to 5.1 million RCRA manifests, requiring about 4.4 to 9.2 million waste handling labor hours, costing about 187 to 733 million annually. That's a staggering amount. Moreover, 34 state governments reportedly spend $199,000 to 416,000 labor hours, costing 6.3 to 37 million annually to administer the current RCRA hazardous waste manifest program, which, when added to waste handler burden, totals 4.6 to 9.7 million hours, or in terms of cost, 193 to 770 million per year in baseline national paperwork burden. According to EPA, the agency estimates the cost of the paperwork burden on states and private entities from the current paper manifest system to be from $193 million to over $400 million annually. Specifically, EPA's fiscal year 2013 budget states a fully implemented electronic manifest system is estimated to reduce the reporting burden for firms regulated on RCRA's hazardous waste provisions by $76 to $124 million annually. Especially at a time of unacceptable high unemployment and enormous federal debt and limited state budgetary resources, Congress should be looking for ways to lighten the fiscal burden generated by the paper manifest system, but do so in a way that makes sense for tracking, enforcement, and public health concerns. In addition to the regulatory and economic relief, an electronic manifest provides proponents also believe collateral benefit of an electronic system to include increased transparency, access to critical public safety and security information for first responders, better tracking services for our citizens, improved data for informed policy decisions, and program management and greater accountability for how hazardous wastes are transported and managed. The Senate has twice passed legislation with the support of the environmental advocacy groups, industry stakeholders, and state regulators that created an electronic manifest system at EPA. Their approach melded private sector expertise with technology and EPA's concern for what a meaningful manifest system needed. If the House is going to act on this issue, we need to understand why this needs to be done and how best to make it work for federal and state regulators, the regulated community, and the U.S. taxpayer. Furthermore, if the industry wants this system and is willing to pay for it, the system should be viable, performance-based, and industry should not be forced to overpay for the system, nor have their money held hostage by Congress or the executive branch. I am aware that there have been concerns raised about various facets of the Senate-passed bill, including whether it requires some spending offset, even though it would be fully funded by user fees, and whether those funds, once collected, should be appropriated. These are issues that we will investigate fully and address to the extent they need to be. I look forward to working with all parties, and I want to thank the witnesses for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us. We appreciate your testimony, look forward to being better educated by your experience. And before I yield back, I want to finish this. I'm going to forward this so it's submitted for the record to Monica back in the back. This is obviously new technology. Mail.house.gov, everybody knows that. And we're going to send it. And that's all we're asking for us to do electronically to be able to follow this and in a very transparent system. With that, I yield back my time and yield to my ranking member, Mr. Green from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so we don't get to the point where you and I are emailing between us up here, that we can sit down and talk to each other. We don't want to lose the history of conversation by emailing. But I appreciate the Chairman calling a hearing and today and welcome both our panels. The common sense change should have broad support in the committee. With the Senate having already acted on the issue, I hope we will move expeditiously to introduce legislation to establish an electronic manifest system that ensures that hazardous waste are designated for and indeed arrive safely at designated hazardous waste management facilities. The benefits of an electronic manifest are obvious, ranging from reduced paperwork, administrative burdens, and millions of dollars that such a system could save. That's why both EPA and the regulated industry agree that we should develop legislation to create an e-manifest system and fund it through user fees. With this kind of agreement and participation, there's no reason why we cannot pass this bill into law this year. So with my goal for this hearing is to hear from any concerns our witnesses have with Senate Resolution 710, if any, so that we can address them and move forward with the bill in the House. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter from the National Resources Defense Council showing their support for e-manifest program.
Without objection, and I'm happy to receive this from my friends at the NRDC.
I feel the same way sometimes. With that, thank you again for our witnesses for appearing. I look forward to hearing our testimony. And I'll just hand you my statement.
I'll see that. So the gentleman yields back his time. Does the gentleman from Georgia seek time? Seeing no other members present, the chair now recognizes Ms. Rudzinski from the Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome. Your full statement's and considered accepted in the record, and you have 5 minutes for an opening statement. Thank you for coming.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay. I will focus my remarks on the need for and efforts necessary to establish a national electronic manifest system, or e-manifest, to track hazardous waste shipments more effectively and efficiently. The Uniform Manifest to track hazardous waste shipments in use today is a 6-copy, multiple paper form that documents the chain of custody for waste shipment. Each person in the chain must sign the manifest and then ultimately file a copy at their own facility, as well as the final facility must file a copy back with the original generator to confirm that the waste got received. Each year, hazardous waste generators prepare about 2 to 5 million manifest forms. We believe it is time that this paper-intensive process enter the 21st century with an efficient e-manifest system, but legislation is needed to do so. The administration believes that there are very significant benefits to an e-manifest system, both in cost savings and program efficiencies for the regulated community and the regulators. Eliminating most of the manual processing steps is expected to result in significant cost savings. The cost savings that we would be estimating would be at least $75 million annually for users and state agencies. The savings should be higher if updated to account for today's costs. Additionally, an e-manifest system would improve the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the National Hazardous Waste Tracking System, providing increased protection to human health and the environment. For example, the e-manifest would produce better data quality. Second, the e-manifest system would provide nearly real-time tracking capabilities. Users would no longer have to wait 30 days or more for paper copies to be mailed, processed, and then finally learn whether or not their shipment arrived. You could track delays and discrepancies very quickly. Third, users could rely on a national e-manifest system as their single point of contact for both their federal and state-required manifest data reporting. Fourth, the e-manifest system could reduce the need for on-site, labor-intensive inspection of paper records. And finally, full implementation of e-manifest could foster new data management and cost-saving possibilities, such as simplification and consolidation of existing requirements and systems for biennial reporting of hazardous waste. The administration supports the development of a fee-based, centralized e-manifest system. Legislation must be enacted to make this a reality. Since manifest users would receive the greater part of the benefits and cost savings from using the e-manifest, it seems fitting to the agency and to the users themselves that the manifest users should fund the development and operation of the system. On May 23rd of 2011, the administration transmitted to the House and Senate an e-manifest legislative proposal. Legislation would need to authorize EPA to collect user fees for system-related activities and to deposit those fees in a special Treasury account from which funds could be expended only for system-related activities. This authorization could explicitly provide that the monies collected as user fees will be available to EPA for use for the payment of e-manifest system costs. Additionally, legislation may need to clarify any requirements for use of unique or unconventional contracting arrangements for e-manifest. If e-manifest legislation and related appropriation bills were to authorize and appropriate funds to EPA to build the e-manifest system, as suggested in the administration's proposal, EPA would likely procure the development of the system using conventional federal acquisition procedures and rely on user fees to cover systems operations and maintenance costs. However, if Congress authorizes use of a different contracting approach for the system build, such as the share and savings type of performance-based contract that was authorized in the Electronic Government Act of 2002, then the contents and requirements of such a contract may need to be addressed in the legislation. It is also important for the legislation to include provisions that will ensure that the e-manifest system and the authorizing regulations developed by EPA be effective in all states on the same day, initially as a federal requirement, but which the states can subsequently be authorized for after enacting the necessary state laws. The e-manifest can be successful as a cost savings tool for users and a profitable venture for vendors only if it is assured that the e-manifest will be implemented consistently in all states on the same date. We look forward to working with Congress to enact legislation to provide for the development of an efficient, effective e-manifest system. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to be here today. That concludes my statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Great. Thank you very much. Sounds like there's much in agreement and great possibilities forward. So we do look forward to working with you. Let me recognize myself for the first set of questions. In 2006, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee received testimony that the hazardous waste manifest burden was the most expensive paperwork requirement EPA imposes under Subtitle C. Do you believe that that's still the case?
I believe that's correct.
And in your testimony, you mentioned that the EPA first started analyzing the economic benefits of transitioning to an electronic manifest system. The agency estimated that a 75% participation rate could result in an annual net savings of $75 million to users and state agencies. How realistic do you think that 75% rate net evaluation is?
The 75% relates to not the generators themselves, but actually the number of manifests that would be covered. So that would be out of the 2 to 5 million paper forms that are floating around every year. We think that's a very realistic number initially and could go higher over time.
And I agree with you. I think people are just itching to move from this to this, away from that. So if given the authority to set up an electronic manifest system, what is a reasonable and appropriate time frame for finding a vendor, negotiating contract, and issuing implementing rules? And how much do you think this would cost?
The length of time for the contract will depend on what kind of mechanism we use because there's been different types of mechanisms suggested. If we use a very conventional procurement approach, typically those contracts for other things take in the range of 12 to 18 months. If in the case of a novel contract, it may potentially take more time.
And my last question is, how much do you envision it will cost a vendor to build a viable electronic manifest system?
At this point, we're estimating somewhere probably between $7 and $16 million, but that's based on old estimates that have not yet been updated and would also be dependent upon what the actual specifications are of the system.
Great, thank you. That ends my questions. I'd like to yield to Mr. Green, Ranking Member, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brzezinski, you mentioned in your testimony that if e-manifest legislation or related appropriations bill were to authorize and appropriate funds for EPA for the e-manifest system build as suggested by the administration's proposal, EPA would like to procure the development of system using conventional federal acquisition procedures and rely on user fees to cover the cost of system operations and maintenance. Senate 710 instead does a share and savings approach, and you indicate the EPA would need the contents and requirements of such a contract to be addressed in the legislation. I really hesitate for Congress to pick winners and losers, but although I have to admit the federal government doesn't have a good history of picking technology programs, the IRS is probably the best. But anyway, has EPA ever done a share and savings contract before?
I'm not positive, but I can certainly get back to you for the record if you'd like.
Okay. When the authority was available for these contracts under the E-Government Act of 2002, EPA worked with GSA to use a share in savings contract for e-manifest. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you discuss that further? What happened from there?
Basically, we were in the process of working on it with GSA. We were working on getting the necessary regulations out that would enable us to do the share and savings. And I believe the act expired before we were able to implement. Okay.
Does Senate Resolution 710 adequately address the requirements you will need for a share and savings approach? If not, can you elaborate on what needs to be done?
The bill, S710, does address the requirements. It has the basic needs in it for us, if that was the bill that was going to be enacted.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that's all my questions.
Gentleman yields back his time. The Chair now, with that, without objection, would like to go into a colloquy with Mr. Waxman. You have permission to do an opening statement if you would like to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the
gentleman is recognized.
The witness for your testimony. I want to thank Ranking Member Green. We requested this hearing back in January, and we're looking to see how we modernize the tracking system for hazardous waste shipments in this country. The goals of these efforts are to reduce burdens, save money, improve data quality. At present, the federal manifest system still relies on paper manifests, just as it did when the system was established in 1980. So we got to bring this system into the 21st century. Technology has advanced significantly over the last 32 years, and we shouldn't be relying on carbon copies to track potentially dangerous shipments. I think you'd get a unanimous agreement on that point from members of the committee here. The adoption of electronic manifest system was proposed by EPA more than 11 years ago. It's been supported by the chemical companies, state agencies, environmental organizations, but it still hasn't been adopted. Ironically, there were technological concerns. Questions about the enforceability of digital signatures are one. So I didn't hear your testimony, but I know that it's been submitted in writing. And so we're concerned about how this program is going to be funded. For many years, hazardous waste generators, shippers, processors have expressed a willingness to fund the program through user fees. I hope we can adopt that concept. I think we'll hear legislation about legislation from the Senate. It embodies the concept that are widely supported, authorizing an electronic manifest system with regulatory authority for EPA and a user fee to cover its costs. I think, Mr. Chairman, the rest of my statement I'd like to have in the record. I appreciate the courtesy you've given me in letting me come in at this point in the hearing to make these comments. In S710, I think we ought to look at it. The bill calls for a share in savings contract. Under standard share and savings contract, the contractor agrees to bear the initial project costs. I think this is something that we ought to examine carefully. I thank you for holding this hearing, and I hope we can work together to solve this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. And now, you would like to ask any questions of the witness?
I'm going to pass on asking questions and let others who have been here longer have their chance, because we're going to have votes in a minute.
Thank you, sir. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia has no desire for questions. A gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director, for your testimony today. I will try to be as brief as I can. Protecting the public from hazardous waste is certainly a critical mission of the Department of Transportation and EPA. Both departments, in coordination with industry and state agencies, have been vigilant in the treatment and transport of hazardous waste because of the safeguards established by the Hazardous Waste Manifest System. Paper manifests provide shipping information to help with the tracking of potentially dangerous materials and information about the contents of each shipment for emergency responders. Since 2001, EPA has proposed a nearly paperless manifest system which would reduce the financial burden of paperwork on states and the industry by more than $75 million per year. I support improving the hazardous waste manifest system by using information technologies. I look forward to transitioning from the existing paper system while continuing to make safety our top priority. Let me just ask you, if I can, Madam Director, S710 proposes a user fee on people who continue to use paper manifest. Is that generally how user fees are allotted, or is that tantamount to a tax?
In terms of the user fees for paper, users that want to stay with paper currently in many states do actually have a user fee, because at the end they have to submit it to the state, and the state oftentimes charges fees for being to enter that manifest data into a system. In the system that is being proposed for electronic manifest, a user would have an option of either going electronically or continuing to use paper. At the end of that time, you would still need to submit the final paper form back into the system. So they will still be users of the system, and so they would be appropriately charged.
I guess what I'm getting at, would a sliding fee scale be better?
One of the things, that's an issue that we would certainly look at if legislation is enacted so that we could impose user fees, and we'd certainly work with the user community to try to make sure we knew what was appropriate.
Just trying to mitigate the amount that would be assessed to small businesses. You know, we're always trying to protect small businesses and their bottom line if we can. Do paper manifests get lost during transit?
Paper manifests can get lost. They can have data quality issues. You can have illegible handwriting so that people don't know exactly what's there. E-manifest offers a far superior approach to that.
Is intentional fraud an issue with paper manifest?
How large an issue that is, I'm not sure, but I can get back to you.
All right. Those are my 4 areas of interest. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back his time. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here today with us, and I have a few questions. If a vendor is operating the electronic manifest system on behalf of EPA, how many EPA staff would be required to work full-time on issues related to the electronic manifest system?
Initially, the number of people at EPA that would be working on it would be working not only on procuring the contract and also developing the regulations that would be needed, but that should go down over time because the regulations, once they're actually in place, those staff would no longer be needed. So it would depend on the actual nature of the contract system adopted as to how many staff would be needed. Initial estimates are about 5 to cover the entire span of contracting and regulatory activity.
Gotcha. What would be the benefit to EPA or DOT of real-time tracking that the electronic manifest would provide, just in general?
Real-time tracking allows you to know where a shipment is. If there's a problem on the road, if a shipment has been delayed, you know immediately where you can find it and can actually get help to it more quickly. It will also allow you to, if there is some kind of an incident, it will help first responders being able to get there.
All right, you had mentioned that the e-manifest system could foster new data management possibilities. Can you quantify what the cost savings to EPA would be through these possibilities that you mentioned?
Qualitatively, I can talk to you about it because it will be dependent upon what system is actually adopted. The types of things we're looking at right now is you've got biannual reporting systems that for all hazardous waste, a lot of that could be incorporated into the e-manifest system so that potentially you do not have to do extra reporting. Things like our hazardous waste export notifications could potentially be melded in as well. Okay. So you could do away with other system requirements. Okay.
Why does the administration believe that a fee-based centralized e-manifest system has the greatest chance of succeeding versus other methods?
The industry and EPA and the states have all been working together and indicated that user fees are important because in these budget times, it's important to find ways to fund the system. So the thought was that the users and the users themselves agree that they should help bear the cost of the system.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
I want to thank my colleague real briefly before we let you go. The only system-related activities on the user fee is, I think that was a great point to raise. This real-time tracking, like UPS, like FedEx, like U.S. Postal Service. So we should be able to get there. And by the time I did my opening statement, sent it back to the clerks to file, they've already sent me a confirmation that they have it. That's really where we want to go, and I think we can get there. We just need to work together. I appreciate my colleagues on the minority side for it looks like that's something we might be able to do. So with that, we want to dismiss you. Thank you for coming, and call our second panel up.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to thank the second panel. First, I'd like to ask unanimous consent for a letter from Dow Chemical in support of e-manifest legislation. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Now we also want to welcome Ms. Sylvia, is that pronounced correctly?
Yes, sir.
Who is the Virginia Department on Environmental Quality, the Senior Waste Inspector. Thank you very much. Also joining her is David Case, Executive Director, Environmental Technology Council. Your full statements are in the record. We'll give you 5 minutes to summarize, and we'll start with you, Ms. Sylvia. So welcome.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members and representatives of the subcommittee. My name is Lisa Sylvia, and I am a Senior Waste Inspector with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, Tidewater Regional Office in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I am here today on behalf of the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials, ASTWOMO, to offer perspective as a regulatory compliance inspector of the Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest System, in particular the proposed development and enactment of the electronic manifest system. In addition to the views expressed in this testimony, I would like to note that individual state or territorial waste programs may have other perspectives based on their state experience with the use and management of manifests. ASTWOMO supports the development and enactment of a hazardous waste electronic manifest system for many reasons, including reason 1, real-time tracking of hazardous waste from generation through transport to its final destination for treatment, storage, or disposal. At each stop along this travel route, a signature is collected and a page of the current multi-copy paper manifest form is removed. Oftentimes, the waste is transferred between transporters and may make many stops prior to its final destination. The generator may be unaware of the location of his waste along the route, although he continues to maintain responsibility for it. Knowledge of the waste being received and accepted at its final destination is not certain until the generator receives a final signed paper copy of the manifest from the destination facility. With an electronic database, the waste could be tracked at each stop, allowing the regulated community, that is, businesses, government entities, and nonprofits, as well as regulators and other government officials, to know where the waste is in real time. Electronic tracking also provides an emergency response benefit. Emergency responders would be able to access information online of a transport vehicle's contents or the expected hazardous wastes at a facility. Thus, potential hazards could be known or anticipated prior to or en route to a transportation or facility incident. Second, for the time and cost savings for the regulated community as well as regulators, from postage and paper form acquisition and retention costs to the time impact on business as I, the inspector, review paper on site. During a hazardous waste compliance regulatory inspection, the inspector will typically review 3 years' worth of manifests. This time includes reviewing the documents, but may also include time waiting for the forms to be located and pulled. In addition, the regulated community loses time while overseeing the inspector as she completes her review on site. This is time lost to the regulated community member's business. As an inspector, I would prefer to spend the time on site with the regulated community, providing compliance assistance in reducing hazardous waste generation, as opposed to reviewing paper. Reason 3, providing access to tracking information in real time across state borders, something not readily accessible under the current paper-based manifest system. 4, giving an inspector access to information to prioritize and focus inspection efforts through desktop reviews. This allows for more productive use of the taxpayer's dollar. Reason 5, electronic manifests would provide for a true adherence to paperwork reduction. Virginia, like many states, has moved toward electronic retention of all documents. This not only reduces paper, but makes records more accessible to everyone, most importantly, the public. And finally, 6, making compliance with regulatory manifest retention requirements easier for business by having everything in one place. In conclusion, an electronic manifest system would ensure national consistency and compliance, save time and costs, make information more accessible, and provide for safer roads and emergency response. Astwomo is committed to moving hazardous waste management, like most every other government program, into the 21st century. That concludes my statement. I am open to questions, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll recognize Mr. Case. Sir, your full statement's in the record. You have 5 minutes.
Chairman, Ranking Member Green, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for your invitation to testify this morning. The Environmental Technology Council is the leading trade association for the hazardous waste management industry, and our companies produce 2 to 5 million manifests every year in order to track hazardous waste from the original point of generation at our customer's facility, over the highways or over the rail tracks, to eventually the recycling or treatment or disposal facility that our member companies operate. I too have a list of reasons why the electronic manifest system is so important, but I've heard from the chairman most of my list of reasons, and from the other witnesses this morning. I think we're all in agreement that an electronic manifest system is long overdue. Therefore, I'd like to use my 5 minutes this morning to address some of the other questions that have been raised about the system. And in particular, I thought I would focus first on the user fee. Industry stepped up many years ago when we were first planning an electronic system and said we would be willing to pay for the system through a user fee. I know that raises concerns about whether the user fee is a kind of indirect tax on industry, but we don't see it that way. The important point to remember is we already pay for the paper system. We pay an enormous amount of money for the paper system. We have to buy the manifests. We have to bear the cost of mailing all the copies through the U.S. mail. We have storage facilities where there are reams and reams of file drawers containing paper manifests, and we have to bear that cost. We see the user fee as a way of obtaining a much more efficient and cost-effective system that will save us money. So in the end, the user fee is a way of getting a net savings while also improving the operation of the e-manifest system. The second question that's been raised has been about our proposal, our support for a share and savings contract as the way of developing the e-manifest system. And the reason we support that is that we think a share and savings contract incentivizes the IT contractor to build a system that will be best for all the users. Otherwise, the contractor won't promptly get back its investment and its profit. The vendor will only get paid if it develops an efficient, cost-effective, user-friendly system. We much prefer that approach to a standard government contract where the contractor simply meets specifications that EPA issues in order to get paid. So we think the share and savings contract is a preferable way to go. We're not wedded to it. If the only way this bill could move forward is if there were some conventional contract requirement, we could live with that. But we just think a share and savings contract is a much preferred way. The third issue that's come up has to do sometimes with the security of the system. We recognize that paper manifests are not particularly secure. They can have errors. They can have all sorts of problems associated with them, including not even being able to read handwriting. And we think an e-manifest system will provide a much more secure system. The vendor will have security provisions in the software to avoid people having hacking in or whatever, and I think it'll work out just fine. Lastly, we've been asked, why doesn't the industry develop a system on their own? Why do you need legislation? Why do you need EPA to do this? We thought very seriously about developing our own system. As you can imagine, our industry, our companies have already developed very sophisticated and innovative business-to-business electronic systems. We do all of our hazardous waste management, from the initial customer order to waste profiling to waste receipts to invoicing electronically. The only thing that's not done electronically is the manifest, and we could very easily integrate that into our system. However, in our discussions with EPA and most particularly the Justice Department, they have emphasized that the manifest is not just a data collection system. It is a very important compliance and enforcement system under the law, and therefore it has to be designed, operated, and enforced by the government, by EPA. It could not be done by a private entity. I think those are the major questions, Mr. Chairman. I'm open to any other questions, of course, that the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Mr. Case does yield back his time. Let me just go briefly to a couple of questions. First of all, we understand storage here, and we understand digitization of records. You go to any member's office, especially in this building, you have a whole wall of file cabinets, which I would guess, other than Mr. Sardi's softball gear, I'm not sure what is being stored in there anymore because everything's digital and filed away, and we just don't have that space. So multiply that by numerous copies along the process of what you put in stuff. So that's a very good point. I think the other one is, and I'd like to go to Ms. Sylvia, to explain the real time. I guess your testimony talked about real time, but you added the phrase across state lines. So can you just expound on that, the importance of that for you?
Well, I guess I'll start with, in Virginia, at the facilities that I inspect, most of that waste leaves Virginia. It may be generated in Virginia, but it leaves Virginia. And in order for me to verify it's been received, or if I want to check on the status, I would have to coordinate with my counterparts in other state agencies, where with this system, I would in theory be able to pull that information up and see that it's there. In some enforcement cases, there may be a requirement on a generator to verify that they have removed some hazardous waste. this would give them the opportunity of being able to show me instantaneously when it was received in whatever state it went to. So it would bring them back to compliance quicker. And so it's just, right now we don't have, each state does not necessarily manage manifests in the same way when they're received. A single system like this would allow me to see what's going on across the country.
I think any young adult 25 years or younger would be aghast that of file cabinets and carbon copy documents that you got to pull from file cabinets, especially in your job inspecting. And I think your testimony also raised that issue of when you're doing a 3-year back look, actually going and grabbing and pulling the files out. I mean, that really happens, right?
Oh, yes, it does. And
very time consuming?
Very time consuming. There's no regulatory requirement to keep the paper on site. So oftentimes there's a need to coordinate to go get the paper from wherever it's being kept. For smaller businesses in particular, they don't know what these pieces of paper really mean. So some pieces may be in one department, another may be with another person, or it may not have even been kept. So there's a time element just waiting for them to locate those pieces of paper.
Thank you. I'm going to end, and I'm going to yield now to Mr. Green, the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Silva, you mentioned your testimony. Virginia has established electronic shipping system to track medical waste. And how was that upstart of that system paid for?
I'm afraid I can't answer. I am aware of the system. It was done at the request of a medical waste transporter, but I don't work directly in the medical waste program, but I would be happy to find that information out for you if you like.
Yeah, I'd be interested because obviously when we're talking about hazardous waste, it'd be similar for medical waste. If the e-waste can work and how it was created, a much smaller system. Mm-hmm. And I know you represent a number of state governments, and I have a very urban district in Houston, and industrial wastes are part of our everyday life that we live in. I have 5 refineries and chemical plants. We try and recycle everything we can because you make money doing it, but there's some things you just can't do, and so you do have to transfer it, though, to different locations, including some landfills. I know we have a big effort in our area, both with our state agency, our city agencies. Going down the road, our trucks get stopped real often. When I'm driving in our district, I see whether it's Houston Police, the county sheriff, or like I said, Department of Public Safety. And I'm sure they're going to stop some of the trucks that are in our district. Would that still comply with what most state laws require to have that manifest on that vehicle with electronic waste? Would your members, who I know I probably represent a bunch of your members, right, but would they be able to do that with that vehicle?
The Department of Transportation, separate from EPA, requires certain kinds of shipping papers to be on the vehicle, and those would continue to be on the vehicle. The manifest, though, is different. It has lots of very important information on the hazard posed by the waste, the volumes, the proper responses, so that unlike you're describing kind of a standard DOT stop it to check the vehicle.
Typically it's weight issues, but they also do a full inspection.
Right. But even the larger concern, I think, is if there's an emergency, if there's a fire on the truck, if there's a spill, the current regulations require that the manifest be kept on the vehicle. Now, you can imagine if there's a fire in the back of the vehicle, an emergency responder doesn't want to crawl into the cab to find the manifest. We would like them to be able to go on a laptop or use their smartphone to find all the information they need for the response.
And so that would be available to the regulatory agency, to the law enforcement who's having the response.
Yes.
The first responders.
Yes, indeed. The system as we envision it, another reason for a share and savings contract is it gives us an opportunity to work with that vendor and make sure all these features are in the system. We would like emergency responders to have their own password and identities and ability to access the information they need in the event of an emergency.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm almost out of time, and I want to have time for my North Carolina colleague. But like I said earlier, I have some hesitancy about the federal government picking a system because we don't have a good record of picking our own computers, much less one like that. So I think share and savings may give us that kind of trial and error that because we want to make sure it works when you pay for it.
Precisely.
So, Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you each for being here today. Ms. Sylvia, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you first, if I may. You mentioned that you've encountered problems with regulated entities' paperwork, including their inability to find the paperwork. EPA also testified about the ability of an electronic system to substantially reduce data problems. So my first question would be, how prevalent is it that regulated entities either cannot find their paperwork, the paperwork is hard to comprehend, or the regulated entity has had problems filling out the paperwork?
Well, I'll just state that from my own experience as an inspector, particularly with smaller businesses, they rely often on their service vendor to prepare the form for them. They're unaware of what it means, what the information on it says. It's all Greek to them, excuse the term. And so they don't understand the significance of that piece of paper. So it tends not to get the respect that it would deserve and gets lost. It's a bill for them, for want of a better term. And so oftentimes when I go to a smaller business who does not have staff that just do environmental compliance, they don't have this paper. That is a citable violation. And so to have an electronic system, that would be already in existence. They would not have that violation, apparent violation, assessed against them.
So you obviously agree with the EPA's assessment that the electronic system would certainly improve that manifest data quality.
And we see oftentimes, because they rely on a third party to complete the form for them, there may be errors on the form because the person filling it out doesn't necessarily have the first-hand knowledge that the generator themselves has. And that, too, can lead to potential violations for that generator. Thank you.
Mr. Case.
Sir.
Our witnesses have mentioned the benefit of the electronic manifest for first responders. Of course, I wasn't here. I haven't heard anybody mention the case out of Apex, North Carolina. And could you tell me how that e-manifest system may have been helpful in that instance?
I would be happy to. There was an incident in Aikens, North Carolina, probably 4 years ago, in which a small storage facility, we call them 10-day transfer facilities, contained a variety of hazardous wastes. And a small fire began. We now think that the fire was a result of pool chemicals that had been picked up and stored at the facility, and that the fire was then accelerated by other wastes that were present. As I understand it, when the emergency responders arrived, they did not have the manifest information for what was in the warehouse. They didn't want to go into the warehouse to try to find it. And so they evacuated an enormous number of people as a safeguard, and they let the building burn down. Our belief is the fire could have easily been put out initially if the information about the waste was available immediately, electronically, and the emergency responders could have had that information.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Case, let me just pick up where you left off there with the emergency responders. Do you envision if we go to an e-manifest system that the responders will have that technology in their vehicles on site, or would they have to rely on a third party for the information?
We believe they'll have ready access on their vehicles to the electronic information. They can use an iPhone, a smartphone, an iPad, as Mr. Chairman has in front of him, any of the commonly available electronic devices.
And would you envision them getting all of the manifest or just relevant portions of it?
An advantage of an electronic system is it would be indexed by transporter, by generator, by any way you wanted to index the information so you could easily access it. You wouldn't be searching through lots of electronic documents.
Do you represent the small shippers or the waste generators?
As customers, we do. Our companies are major hazardous waste management companies, but we service dry cleaning shops, gas stations, all of the small businesses across the United States.
Would you speak to the sliding fee scale that I mentioned earlier? Would a fee scale based on the amount of waste be helpful?
Yes. I think the vendor will have to come up with a fee scale that promotes maximum usage of the electronic system. And For those generators who have to use paper, we will accommodate them and simply require some sort of fee for transferring their data into the electronic system. It'll still be a lot cheaper for them than the current system.
Just thinking ahead about the small businesses and don't want them to be overly burdened with large fees.
Absolutely, and I think they will be able to take advantage of the electronic system and the savings inherent in that, and whatever paper manifests are still required will be handled more cheaply.
All right. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time, and I'll just finish by saying for the first-line responders, which we work with very closely, especially in the telecom subcommittee, and some of the piece of legislation, whether it's spectrum auction and whatever dollars go to, what we've been trying to do is make sure that federal dollars do help the local first-line responders, and so that the chief or the engine does have the iPad or the iPad 2 where they can take pictures, where they can drill down and look at a building and see the structure and stuff. So I do think working together, then they can have a much more information than they have now, which they really have zero now. So this is very exciting. We look forward to working with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the expeditious nature and us getting through this as they've just called votes. Seeing no other members and hearing no request for time, I'll call the hearing now adjourned.